First, I want to thank both the West Hill Shul and Tanakh Study for partnering with the SCA and making this day the Yom Iyun for our second annual without last year. Yom Iyun for Shabbat Tammuz. I also want to say that the SCA prides itself on punctual classes, so it's good to get started right on time, but we'll make up the time the rest of the day. We're very excited about this panel. The SCA over the last few months has done a few panels with different rabbis across different organizations and schools in the community. We had our Pesach Yom Iyun with couples about how we prepare for Pesach, which was a big hit. And as we continue on to this one, we have a great panel. I think we don't have a lot of time for introductions, but just from my right to left, Rabbi Beyda of Yeshivah Flatbush, Rabbi Richard Tobias of Magen, Yeshivah, Rabbi Howard Bald from Hillel, and Rabbi Moses Haber from my personal favorite, Barkai. So without further ado, I'm going to open it up to Murray to ask some questions, and we'll get the perspectives from different schools or among the community. So thank you.
Thank you, Joey. Thank you, everybody, for attending, including the rabbis on a fast day. It's not so easy. We're putting them, in the spotlight, and I hope you forgive me if I ask any pointed questions, but I won't, because it is a fast day. It's already a little bit later than we expected. We'll try to keep the whole day the whole event to about an hour. Even under that, the format will be, we had some general questions that were given to the rabbis in advance that I will ask them, and then we'll open up the question to everybody that joined us today. So I do ask that when we do open up the floor to questions, that you keep the questions concise, and that you make it in a way that the people can answer. Thank you so much, honey. I really appreciate it. This one's for me. All right. So it's really great to have, like Joey mentioned, so many educators here today, sitting on the stage, from different organizations, yet representing the same cause, which is education. So that being said, there are a lot of common issues that we can collaborate on, and for parents, me being one of them, like you just saw, it would be edifying to hear from the people in positions that are closest to our children every single day, to learn what we can do as parents and as a community in order to overcome some of the challenges that we face. So the topic of today's panel is spirituality. So before we dive into some of the questions, I guess I'll start moving from, I'll go from left to right because Joey went from right to left. Rabbi Haber, what is spirituality? How would you define spirituality? If we're trying to create spiritual students, I just, what does that mean?
I had the same question.
Should I ask it differently? I mean, we could ask, how do we create observant children? How do we create formed children?
So I think the question of spirituality in itself, what does that mean? That I have a spiritual child? I'm not sure that has, and the panel could disagree with me, and that's what's beautiful about me sitting on this panel with all these rabbis, is that I think this gives us a forum for conversation, which in a respectful way, that even if we disagree, we can grow together from, and maybe learn from each other. I think the question itself is faulty. Spirituality in Judaism might be a concept that comes from outside of Judaism. What I would say is that a boy or a girl that grows up with a commitment to actions, commitment to Torah mitzvot, is speaking the language of connection to God. And the only language, in my opinion, that a boy or a girl, or even adult, can speak to God in, is in the Torah mitzvot that God gave us. Anything further than that, I would think, would be something that comes from his own personal creativity and his own imagination. The Dimayon, that the Rambam says, the Dimayon, the imagination, is a very powerful tool that we have in our minds, but at the same time could lead us down a road of creating our own systems and philosophies of approaching God. So I would say that leading a child to believe that they can be spiritual with God outside of the framework of halakha would be misleading that child and maybe even hurting that child's ability to connect with God the way our tradition says.
Thank you, Rabbi Moses. Okay, so halakha. So that's a good starting point. Rabbi Gold, I don't want to do this for every question, but since that was a loaded question with a loaded answer, maybe you want to respond from the deal side of things. Maybe that's what Rabbi Haber. Now we want to include a diversity of opinions. So
the fresh air certainly inspires us in other ways. Actually, much that Rabbi Haber said, I agree. However, I think I would phrase it in a little bit different way and maybe disagree on one particular point. When you think of spirituality, so really there's only one idea of spirit, and in the Jewish tradition, which is the concept of ruchniut, as opposed to gashmiut. There's of the spirit and of the physical. And the source of all that is spirit is, of course, the Borei Olam, who is the ultimate spirit, the perfect non-physical being. And the Borei Olam gave each and every one of us a Tzelem Elokim, which the Rambam does say is alternatively referred to in Tanakh either as Ruach or as Nefesh, or Neshama sometimes. And therefore, the way to really have spirituality, the correct concept of spirituality, would seem to be to develop one's Tzelem Elokim, to be infused with a awareness of the reality of the Borei Olam in everything that we do. Wherever we turn our heads, wherever our eyes go, whatever we hear, we have a connection to the Borei Olam. But I would agree with Rabbi Haber that the practical course with students, and I would say it's not a question of American education, it's a question of Sinai, that since from the moment of Sinai, the way to really have the spiritual is going to be through the system of Torah, through the system of mitzvot. Not to have a system of mitzvot, we cannot count on any human being to end up being Abraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, or people like that, who are able to have spiritual lives, meaning lives where they're developing their Tzelem Elokim and relating to the Borei Olam properly. That is not going to take place very frequently. And therefore, the Borei Olam in his Chesed gave us a Torah, and the Torah is a system that really shows us the proper way to live. That ultimately, like the mitzvah of Teshuvah itself, Lashuv El Hashem, to return to God, to be connected to God. So I would say that, of course, the challenge in education, which will probably be the rest of this panel discussion, to me at least, is the challenge is that we are able to give over to our students not just the Taryag Mitzvot, but that they should do the Taryag Mitzvot not in a mechanical, checking off the box manner, but rather every time they engage in a mitzvah, it's an engagement that truly gives them a concept that brings them that much closer to the Borei Olam.
Thank you. Wow. So very interesting. Before we sat down here, I was talking to Jesse Salem, who did such a fantastic job in pulling this whole day together for Tanakh study, and
Barkai parent.
and board member. One of the things that he said is spirituality to him means, and it touches on what you just said, Rabbi Gould, endowing what we do every day with meaning. Endowing some of our Jewish practices, whether it's halakha, not to just be an empty ritual, but endowing it with meaning. Whether even Talmud Torah, like we're doing today in Tanakh study, how do we turn it from just being, any other generic class into something that's infused with meaning? So, Rabbi Tobias, I would be curious, in your experience as an educator, both in Beit Torah and Magen David, working with youth on a regular basis, maybe you can give us some practical steps.
So I want to spin off of what Rabbi Bolt said. I think probably one of the greatest challenges that we face is creating a Judaism, so to speak, that is attractive to the young adults, in that very often they see it as do's and don'ts, as rules that can and cannot be trespassed, and they don't see it as a way of life. And I think the greatest challenge we have is to make it as relatable as possible in their lives, to the point where they're not doing it because they have to, although they do, but because they want to do those things. And I think part of that is breaking things down into smaller pieces and allowing them to understand how the things that the Torah prescribes gives their life meaning. And a lot of that comes from breaking down the barriers between what they think the Torah is imposing on their life as opposed to what the Torah is giving to their lives. So I think that's one of the greatest challenges we have. How do you do it? One, I think we have to allow kids to ask questions. Very often, I think we turn our classrooms into lecture halls where we're talking to the children about what is and what is not. I think we have to allow more give and take and allow kids to ask the difficult questions, obviously within context and with the right atmosphere and parameters in the room. And I think we have to engage kids and allow them to see the ability to fuse together the Torah and the world that they live in. They are not and should not be opposed to one another. And again, that's a difficult balance that we ride. How do you do it on an everyday basis? It really depends on the age group, the subject, the questions that you have. But in terms of a general approach, we have to allow questions. We have to allow kids to feel uncomfortable with the things that they're dealing with, and to show them that there is a comfortable zone to be able to mesh the two together and to see Torah and the world through the same lens. I don't know if that answers the question, but I think that definitely is a challenge that we have.
I'd like to ask the same question to Rabbi Beyda, only to just get another perspective from a high school educator that's dealing with some of the older students.
So first of all, I want to give a different version of spirituality. I don't equate spirituality to religiosity or even relationship with Hashem. I have a very different look at it. I'm building off of an old concept that may not be precise, but I think it's good, simple enough and helpful enough for us to understand today, of the dichotomy between body and soul, and the physical and the spiritual side of a person, which may be emotional, may be intellectual. It's a whole conglomeration of intangibles. And I think that the recognition that each person is made up of this body and soul, so the spirituality is, to me anyway, is that side of the person being spoken to. So to some degree it taps into Jesse's concept of finding meaning, but therefore it need not even be necessarily primarily religious, or maybe even what we would call religious. And I think that that's still important and valuable. And since that's the definition as I would have it, and we'd be recognizing that each student has this very essential part of him or her, and how do we speak to that student? How do we teach that student to nurture that side of him or herself? And then we could talk in a lot of different ways, but I think it opens the possibility for a lot of different avenues through which a student can relate spiritually and can find meaning spiritually. And it could be things that are creative, like music. It could be athletics. It could be study. It could be service, community service. There's a lot of different ways that people can be spiritual, I think, in a healthy way. So I would that's kind of I'm answering both questions, sort of.
Thank you. So going back to Rabbi Bold, mentioned something that you just touched on, Rabbi Beyda, but I'm going to address the question to Rabbi Bold, if you don't mind. You mentioned body and soul, and Rabbi Bold mentioned Gashmiut versus Ruchaniyut being a big challenge. Maybe you could just talk about that for a minute. What are the challenges that you're seeing the students struggle with?
Well, simply put, we live in a world where the physical is the ikar. They live in a world, they're taught that even when you ask them, what are you going to do in life? To them, that means what job you're going to carry, how much money you're going to make. It's a world that they're bombarded with the importance of the physical. And to be able to inspire students to be able to see that the essence, everybody talks olam haba, everybody talks about these things, but it doesn't seem like they're concepts that are really incorporated in any meaningful way in their lives, when ultimately they're not pursuing the ruchniya, the spiritual, the non-physical. And I think that's something that we as educators, and there are many methods that we use, but we are trying, and we're happy to any method, by the way. There's no one particular method. We have different students in the building, but it all, as I said in my opening remarks, it always has to be connected to the reality of the Borei Olam. So if for one student it means on Shabbat it's the singing, it's the dancing, it's spending time at a Shabbaton, but that's attached to an idea of a Shabbaton, of a day that's dedicated to the Borei Olam, then that's meaningful. Even though it might not be my particular avenue, which is much more certainly connected to learning and knowledge. But to me it's a very meaningful thing, and that's why I think it's important. I'm sure in all our day schools we do have these different avenues. I think it's important that our students see role models who are like them or like her, that people who live in this physical world, bombarded by everything around them, and yet have withstood the challenge and are clearly dedicated to Torah, to mitzvot. And again, my model doesn't necessarily have to be a Rebbe or a Morah. It could be a business person. It could be a professional. But that they see such role models, I think, is so important. In inspiring students to do this. But I think the challenges are great. I mean, I know in our school, I know of other day schools I've been associated with, just the message our students get from their parents that the Judaic studies is just not that important, or not as important as math, science, and social studies, is very unfortunate. I mean, if anything, our day schools teach that all knowledge and all the pursuits are important, but certainly we want to convey to them that Torah is the thing that has to inform their existence. So that's certainly the challenge. That's the hardest thing, I think, to overcome, and to turn a student on to Torah and the beauty of the wisdom of Hashem. That's priceless, and I think that goes a long way shaping the way they'll lead their lives.
Thank you. So as a follow-up, I want to ask Rabbi Tobias, if that doesn't happen in the lower grades, and already they're getting to high school, what do?
Okay, so I'm in the high school.
So
I'm just clear.
right.
Okay.
So I'm asking, you get them, and maybe they didn't get that perfect, ideal type of education that Rabbi Bold described. And now they get to the high school. Now what? What does the school do? What do the parents do?
Even if they got it in the lower school, there's a whole new set of problems that arise in the high school, regardless of what happens for the first 8 years of education, that create a whole new being. That's the truth of the matter, because you're dealing with different kind of thoughts, you're dealing with different kind of hormones, you're dealing with different kind of venues out into the world, and it becomes a lot more difficult. So all the challenges that I will delineated are 100% there. I think in the high schools we deal with a lot more. We deal with the pressures of society, we deal with the pressures of their peers, we deal with Fortnite, we deal with all of the things that come with being a 15, 16, 17-year-old adolescent in a world that was confusing 30 years ago and has become only that much more confusing now. I could list the problems all day. What are the solutions? I'm not 100% sure, because I think that we're living in a world where the problems are coming a lot faster than the solutions are. If when you tackled one, something else opens.
So let me ask it this way. How can parents be better partners with schools in order to overcome whatever the obstacles may be?
Great. So I'm going to say two things. I'm going to say, one, I think that our parents need, I think one is our parents need to partner with the schools, in that it sometimes happens where the schools will do what they can to create policies, and then the child violates the policy, and then the first person to call is the parent saying, school's wrong, what are you doing to my child? I think that the parents need to be on board, that people in the educational system are doing the best that they can to create policies to provide for the health of the child, and that we can't expect our children to follow suit if the person who is creating the tension, so to speak, is the parent. So I think that there needs to be more engagement between school and home in terms of, parents advocating for what the school is behind. Number one, and number two, I think that Rabbi Bold made a very interesting point in that I think that there is a lack of importance that is put on Judaic studies. And I think that our students need to be able to see that all of the institutions, certainly that are represented here, are creating a world where everything is seen through the lens of Torah. And we are pushing the importance, of course, of the general studies. And we want our students to be career-bound and college-bound and to go out into the world and do the things that are going to make them successful citizens of society and Judaism. But at the very same time, hand in hand, is the Torah subjects. And I think we'd like to get some more partnership in that regard.
So I want to go back to the comment about Fortnite and just in general the distraction of technology and things like that. So Rabbi Haber, could you just maybe give parents some practical advice on how to balance between all the fun stuff that's going on in social media and Fortnite and whatever gaming console du jour is out there versus focusing on what's important and the values that we want to instill in the students?
So thank you for that exciting question to answer. But before I do, by a show of hands, and this is really an amazing thing I'm witnessing right today, by a show of hands, how many of you in the audience are single or are married without children? Raise your hands, please. This is the beginning of a new age in our community. Put your hands down. The fact that most of the room, that I think it's 60% of the room, are singles or young married people, are here today on a fast day to come to a panel about education gives me a ray of hope that the next 10, 15 years are going to be really meaningful in making sure that this community is headed in the right direction. Because if you care about this now as single boys and girls, young men and women, or young married family members, this is a true sign of hope that I think we could all agree we're all excited to have your children in our schools at some point. I don't know, Deal is really making a push for it now. I would say that the answer to the question has nothing to do with religion. You're really asking a parenting question. And one of the beautiful things, and one of the, I think, the hallmarks of the success of Barkai Yeshivah is because at Barkai Yeshivah, parents are partners. Parents are partners in Barkai Yeshivah to such an extent that nightly we require parents to sit down and to do shinun with their children, to read Pesukim, to make sure that even from the youngest age, the kids are coming home with sheets, with opening Torah, reading with Ta'amim, and the parents are along for the same process. Not only that, but when we have parent enrichment programs at Barkai, the parents come to learn Torah, they come to hear about new ideas, they come to express. Thank God we have a very activist parent body, so they're very involved in their child's education. And I think that's a large part of the reason for Barkai Yeshivah's success, besides our wonderful teachers. But at the end of the day, the parent is the parent. And when parents cede control of major decisions, as how much time you're going to spend on the device, or what app you're allowed to download, or what channel you're allowed to watch, if parents cede control of those decisions to their kids, then kids are running the show. And I beg the parents in the audience to think about parenting more, right? Meta think about this. Think about all the decisions you make, how you spend time with your kids. Do you go on hikes with them? Do you take them fishing? Do you take them outdoors? Or you just leave them in front of the tube? It's not even a tube these days. Do you give your children a well-rounded appreciation of God's creation? Or you're letting your kids make those decisions based on what they're fed from Western culture and from pop culture? I would say that the success of our religion over 3,000 years is that we have a hierarchy of family values. We have families that are based upon Jiddo and Sitto and Abba and Ima, and that's who directs the decisions in the families, not the kids. We can't allow it. And if we do, we're going to fall into a problem that Rabbi Tobias was talking about, where the kids are coming home, the parents is okaying whatever the kid did in school, and then you have this dichotomy between the administration and the parents, and that is a recipe for failure.
All right. So I just want to ask Rabbi Beyda, anything you'd like to add to that? It looks like you're itching to say a couple of things. So,
I'm just hungry. So I think that I want to work off of Rabbi Bould's issue of materialism, and I think that our greatest challenge is our greatest blessing. We live in a community that just has a tremendous prosperity in general, and as a result of that, there's a lot of beracha that goes with it, and a lot of it just costs a lot. And because it costs a lot, everyone knows that they have to earn a lot and make a lot and work a lot in order to be a part of this community in one way or another. And I think that there's a tremendous drive for that to happen. If I could count on one hand the amount of time, if I could count the amount of times that people said to me, I don't have $100 million so my kid needs to do this and needs this so that he can make this, and there's such an immense pressure that we put on ourselves to succeed on the material side that ends up being how we measure whether we're succeeding or not. And in doing so, we're missing out on that other, what I'll call half, but I don't think it's a half at all. I think it's much more than a half of this other side of the person, which speaks to Torah, speaks to religion, but also speaks to other things. I think that along the lines of what Rabbi Haber was saying in terms of having our children have an appreciation for things beyond what money we're going to make and what possession we're going to have and which are all important. They're all blessings and they're all an important part of living the life that we want to live and that we should want to live. But putting that in the proper perspective, I think, is the greatest challenge. So I think being able to teach our children that perspective is something that's really, really our greatest challenge. It's something that schools and parents have to work together on in providing what's important, what's the perspective. I think it has a lot to do with what we celebrate, what we hold up, what we look down upon. And I think too often what we're holding up is the material accomplishments. Too often what we're holding up are things that don't see the full perspective or that block out this full perspective. And I think if we could change some things, I think it would be providing our children with the proper perspective. I'll give you an example of something that's not a school thing, but it's a community thing. We all know that on the high holidays we like to sell the honors for whether it be Kal Nidre or some other aliyah, and usually where does that go to? It goes to the highest bidder. And the message that we're giving is the thing that we respect is on the one hand it's tzedakah, but on the other hand it's who has the most. And there are a few congregations that make a point of giving major aliyot, Kal Nidre or Yonah, to someone that exemplifies community service for that year, for example, someone that did something outstanding. And so I think finding ways to celebrate those things, to recognize people for those things, I think would help give us the broader perspective that our students need.
Thank you, Rabbi. Again, it was truly an honor to stand up here and start off the conversation. At this point, I want to end the segment where I start off the questions and open it up to the crowd. I see a couple of antsy people that really want to ask, or at least they look like they want to ask questions.
It's hunger.
Yeah. So thank you again for coming. I hope we could do this again. I think it's just nice to see how much we agree on as four different schools that may be perceived as being in competition. At the end of the day, we're all doing the same thing, and that's endowing our children with education. And it's really wonderful to, and I'm honored to be up here with all of you. So with that being said, I'd like to open it up to questions. Please keep them concise. Please be considerate. There's other people that want to ask questions. I see Bobby wants to ask a question, so.
Unlimited funds, and you had all the money in the world,
Want to take that one?
I'm not sure how much of a fantasy is this allowed to be because.
What are we working on?
So I'll just repeat the question. The question is, in an ideal world, if there's unlimited funds, as educators, where would you invest the money?
I would first of all, I'd set up a scholarship fund that every student who goes to Israel to learn or spends a full year of learning after high school, that they would also be funded in their college careers as well. Complete incentive program. The second thing I would create is somehow also some kind of really a strong community-wide program that would be available to parents that they could learn as well in the evenings. I think serious money should be invested in that. I think that's a very important effort because I don't think we're going to get the concept of the Dibarta Bam, that the essence of life is Torah, to the children if they don't see it as well in the parents. So those would be right away two things that I would love to see happen.
Okay, Rabbi Beyda, you want to jump in as well?
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to see similar to it, but a fellowship fund for people to be able to have careers that are not the traditional community careers. I think that the traditional community careers, by and large, are not spiritual in almost any way in their basic function. It doesn't mean that a person can't be, but you don't have musicians and artists, and it's, even though we have a decent number of community teachers and community servants, it's not anywhere near what it really could be if the finances made it work. And some of the finances aren't forever finances. Some of it is just give me a path to get there. So I would really love to see unlimited. I don't think it has to be unlimited. I think it could be a reasonable amount of money that our community could handle to support people that give this broader to make our community a broader perspective. I think if you were to poll the parents of any of our schools, what career do they see their children in? I think you'd get it into 5. You could count it on one hand. I think that's terrible. I think that's not seeing the broader perspective. I think that's pigeonholing our children in unnatural and unhealthy ways. And I think that if we could find ways to expand that, you want to use a fancy term like to incubate that would be fantastic.
I'm happy to say, by the way, that Hillel's produced some very good Rabbanim over here. That's an effort that should continue.
I'd like to say that, to jump off Rabbi Beyda's point, that what keeps me up at night, not the board, but what keeps me up at night is not finances, but young adults who want to enter education. And if I had all the money in the world, I would give it back to the young adults to incentivize them to enter into a life of hinuf, whether it's as a formal rabbi or not, but to allow them the possibility to entertain a lifestyle that's meaningful with kavod and respect, and to use the funds that way to make sure that young people from the youngest age see education as a possible career path. On another hand, I would like to say that if I had all the money in the world, I'd like to really put my money where my mouth is and say that education and Torah is not limited to school. And I don't know where we came up with this concept of a 10-month school year, but education is not limited to wintertime. Why don't we have learning 12 months out of the year? And Yeshivah, Flatbush, Magen, Hillel, Barkai can run programs in the summer where the kids are still learning throughout the day.
So shameless plug. Anybody that wants to come to the SCA learning program, they have it. The brochures are out in the synagogue. There's plenty of learning going on, so pick it up. Check us out on social media. But I wholeheartedly agree, Rabbi, without any reservation that yes, it's there's no vacation from Torah, as the cliche goes. But also we have programs like Jesse Salem's putting together, Tanakh study, that are supplemental. So maybe that's also another area to invest in. Okay, that being said, let's jump to the next question because there's so many other
Bobby's going
okay,
to get
okay, go ahead.
I hope it's coming with a pledge, Bobby.
Depends on what you think.
So I would say, I want to reiterate some of the things that were said in Ed one. I think in conversations that I have had with some of the college and young professionals, there are many of them who really do want to go into this field and just feel that the pressures, as Rabbi Beyda mentioned before, are so overwhelming that they push that thought out of their minds as much as possibly, and even though it kills them, and 10 or 15 years down the road, they may be eating themselves up alive because they're doing not what they love to do. I would love to be able to see us have the ability to invest in young minds who are willing and want to go into education. I would piggyback off of what Rabbi Beyda said, and I would say that I do think that we run a dual curriculum, which is not cheap, and sometimes it comes at the expense of some of the other things that our students want to do, whether it be a larger music program or a larger drama program or something else that we can't necessarily afford, because with the dual curriculum and everything that goes into that, it's very expensive. But I think some of our students are very, very talented, and those talents are not being met just because we don't have the funds or the resources to be able to do it. And third, I would like to be able to bring down the tuition. So if we can put some of that money and be able to bring the tuition down so that everybody can afford it and not feel the pressures, and that spills over into other life decisions, I think that would be something that would take the community very, very far.
Thank you. Jesse, you had a question? Or it solved it? Okay. Okay, so I'll take the next question.
Hey, John. Irving Hannon, Yeshivah graduate, 2016. So it's just something that I've been seeing, talking to people. It's just a common theme in Judaic classes in high school. There is a certain stigma to it being a looser system, and people take it less seriously, and it shouldn't be like that. So what's your tactic to eliminate that and turn it into something that it should be?
What, Judaic studies?
Judaic studies classes as opposed to general studies
So
classes.
how do we make our students take Judaic studies more seriously in the classroom?
Is that the question exactly?
Yeah, because there's a certain kids take it.
That's the question.
Joke.
Rabbi Beyda, you want to
I think a lot of it is, how do we take it, and who's the we? So I think that's kind of what Rabbi Tobias was saying before, is that parents have to say, hey, what did you get on your Gemara test? The same way they say, what did you get on your math test, for example. I think it's also the way that the school runs it. Meaning, one of the things that we do in Flatbush, which you could be critical of, but I think is actually contributes to addressing what you're talking about. We give a standardized test for each subject, meaning everyone in the grade has to take that test, and it's a big test and it's a serious test. And I think students end up having to study really hard for it and take it really seriously. You could say, is that just school? Does that just, does it speak to their heart? And there's what to be said about that. But on the other hand, it speaks a lot to what you're saying, which is it's taken very seriously. I think also, do the teachers take it seriously? I think you'll find that in most Jewish schools that the secular studies teachers have a degree of professionalism that is pretty excellent, either because they were trained in public schools or because there's curriculum that are already set out, or for a variety of different reasons. And sometimes the Judaic studies teachers themselves don't take the subject as seriously as they can, maybe because they're afraid of alienating people, maybe because they weren't trained as professionally, maybe a variety of different reasons. But I think that the rabbis and other Judaic studies teachers need to make sure that they themselves are conveying that message of take it really seriously, be really professional in what you do. And I think students feed off that vibe a lot.
All right. I don't think we have to every question. Unless Rabbi Paul, do you know this young man? Do you know this?
I know this, yeah. No, I think Rabbi Beyda made a good point. He only used the one word, alienating. I think that's a tremendous factor with many of the Judaic studies teachers. Whereas a teacher in general studies doesn't have to worry whether the student really likes them, doesn't like them. It's completely professional atmosphere. It's about the grades. It's about doing well in the course. That's kind of really where it begins and ends, and everything else is, just extra credit if you happen to have a good relationship with them or not. Many of I think the Judaic studies are really concerned about the students, that in no way they should do anything, like Rabbi Beyda said, to alienate them, turn them off, God forbid, from religion. So I think as a result, and I think they make a mistake, certainly it's not my approach in my own classes. In my own approach, I feel that if teachers come into a room, a Rebbe or Marah, and they give the students the sense that they are fully committed to this subject, this is not what they're doing as a job, this is because they love it. This is part of their avodah Hashem, this is part of their worship of God, and therefore they're coming in, they're well prepared, they're ready to teach Torah from the time the bell rings till the bell rings a second time. And any joking around the room is pretty much controlled even by that teacher, by the Rebbe, and it enhances the whole spirit of the room. I think then, that's really the way I think our teachers should approach it. But I think there is a tremendous concern, especially probably also because of lack of training, that they really are worried about you guys, that they don't turn you guys off. And I think it's l'shem shamayim, but I think it's misplaced.
All right. Okay, so Joe, you had a question? Mr. Harari from Israel, you're a guest. I should have asked the guest first. That's not the right way, but forgive me.
Thank you for asking me, but I don't have a host of questions, but I'll try to limit it to one.
You must have a host of answers.
No, unfortunately, I don't have the answers.
You're a good host.
I want to really acknowledge the great work you're doing. The zechut I have to be involved with your students when they come to the year. It's a privilege and a pleasure, and Irving is one of my great pleasures also. So we find in a lot of cases the interest and the passion for further study comes after they leave high school and they spend the year in Israel. And we'll move to that should be part of the standard, and it's true. For the most part, it's true. Unfortunately, that's only the ones who do come to Israel, but it's true. The problem is to continue study post-high school on a meaningful level and to be able to withstand the pressures and the challenges of college life. In order to do that properly, they have to know how to read. And my biggest school, or I don't know how to say it in English, frustration is that they come through a system 12 years, a lot of money, and they can't read text. And that prevents them from channeling the passion also how do we get them to read? I mean, if it was Spanish, they'd be thrown out after 2 years if they can't read and write. Here we have them for 12 years, 4 hours a day, and I'm not being critical. God forbid.
By the way, the time is up. Program's over.
So we can understand the question. To summarize,
we went through the same school.
Yeah.
Okay, and these are more sophisticated today. We know how to read. Why can't they read today? That's my question.
So Rabbi Haber, I'll let you take that one. You're dealing
She knew.
So, thank you, Joey, for that question. I think, I hesitate to speak in front of the founder of the Yeshivah, but Barkai was built with the concept of getting back to the basics. That you can intellectualize Judaism all you want, but if you can't read the Sefer, if you can't feel at home in the Tanakh, if you can't pick up the Sefer and read correctly, then all the intellectualism falls away for no purpose. And what we do with the Yeshivah is that we make sure from the earliest age, through, rote repetition sometimes, of basic Kelalei Dikduk, and reading with your parents over and over and over, and beginning to read Sefer Torah in the Bet Knesset as early as possible, that allows our students to feel at home in the text. We hope, again I'm speaking only for the elementary schools, we hope that continues later in the high school. But we do believe that without the basic sense of comfort with the Sefer, you're right. And we all have to work much harder. Barkai spends a lot of money to make sure that the kids know how to read by the time they graduate. They have to sit with me before they graduate. Each student sits with me. I make sure that they know how to read properly. And if not, we find them supports throughout that time to make sure that they have the ability to read. So thank you for that question. I agree with you completely.
I want to add one thing. First of all, I want to acknowledge the point. I think it is a struggle, but I think it goes back to something we said before. It used to be that the way that you engage the world was through reading. Today, much of how people engage the world is not through reading. And so I think it's bigger than the schools. I think it's a cultural problem in that our kids, there's so many other more enticing things to do than read, right? What would you do if you were bored on a rainy day? You would read a book. Today, you're on a video game, you're on the computer, you're on the cell phone. So, pashut, they're not. By the way, I would say that I think the level of secular reading may have also declined over the last 10 years or so, because I think it's the same problem. I think our kids they don't engage the world through literarily anymore. I think they engage the world, everything is coming to them, and it's a problem we face globally of getting our children to read whatever language it may be, more profusely, more consistently, and it's incumbent on the parents to make sure that reading is done. I don't want to ask, but how many people read with their kids as much as they may want to, or as much as they used to anymore? And I think it's a struggle. I think it's a struggle as a parent and certainly as an educator.
Okay. Back. Right. Yeah.
I guess this question for the high school rabbis, but as a college graduate recently myself, I see a lot of what goes on in the world of college. I'm not going to name schools, but a lot of certain schools, and a lot of Syrian schools, not necessarily promote, but allow kids to go to certain colleges, or push for kids to go to certain colleges that really let them lose their spirituality. And we see kids going to colleges where they're actively losing their spirituality that they might have gained in high school, or that they might have gained around the community. So how as the high schools that you guys are from, how can we allow kids to go out to these colleges where they're losing everything that they might have gotten and losing their spirituality, and a lot of times going up there and doing not great things.
Excellent question. Rabbi Bull, do you want to take a stab at that one for us?
Well, first of all,
it is a fast day,
what
guys,
school,
so
what
come a little
school
slow.
are you from? Okay. So first of all, I think your point overall is something that probably, maybe more than anything else, gives the let's say in Hillel Yeshivah, I'll speak for Hillel Yeshivah, the head of school, the Rosh Yeshivah, the dean of students. I think that issue more than anything else gives us sleepless nights. And there's another word that you used that really I think is the key point. You said, how does the high schools allow? It's not up to us ultimately. We don't allow. We give guidance. We teach. Even I'm sure in all our schools, those who, even our college guidance people, try to steer people to places that we think will be better insofar as its Judaic values, and certainly going to certain of them, is qualitatively a different experience. If you go to, let's say, Yeshiva University or something like that. So that is a main concern, but we're working with parents, with students, and therefore we do our best to guide them. But the problem, if you have, I'm not kidding. I mean, we're always talking about this. What are the best ways that we can to convince people that this is not the place? And I'll tell you the truth. I think many parents, the way they look at college, if they went to college, they look at what college was 20, 30 years ago. And it's a very, very different world that's going on campus today than it was 20, 30 years ago. As liberal as it may have been 20, 30 years ago, it's in a whole different place today. And that I know from talking to students. It's shockingly different in just a couple of decades. So I think a lot of our parents are just looking for that name university, and they have no clue what really college life is like, day in or night out. I mean, they have no clue.
So just to sharpen the question a little bit. So as schools, are you saying, as Hillel, I'll just ask for Hillel because we can only speak for Hillel, are you saying that you don't recommend out-of-town college, or you don't recommend it for everyone?
We don't have any particular rules or guidelines like that, but when we think a student is going to a place that we don't necessarily think is the best place for them, personally, religiously, etc., we will make a phone call to the parents. We will have a discussion. Again, it's a discussion. Can't set rules. We can just guide.
I
Rabbi
think
Beyda,
that
you want to jump in
I
from,
think that
Brooklyn
I think
perspective?
the question, which is a fair question, I think on some level simplifies the problem or oversimplifies the problem. I don't know that that's always the case. I think there are certainly horror stories, and there are certainly people that have that get turned off or go off the path, if you want to call it that. But I think there are plenty of cases where that's not the case, and there are plenty of cases where students do connect with whether it's their connection to Torah, to Hashem, with the spirituality on college campuses. And I don't know that it's a simple message of don't go to either college in general or out of town college or this specific college. I think it's a question about who are you, what are you about, what's important to you. If this is important to you, which it should be, so you're going somewhere where it may work together with you in some ways and against you in some ways, how are you going to deal with that? So knowing if you're going to a campus that has a lot of religious Jews, that has programming, that has, whether it be Chabad or Hillel or JLIC, knowing what's there. Also knowing how the campus is towards Israel, which is a big issue. We didn't mention the word Israel, but to me, I think Israel is a big part of our students' spirituality. So I think that's something that's important. So I think to say how do schools allow or not allow, and I'm going to use the word promote. How do schools promote or not promote certain colleges? I don't think it's that simple. I think schools are responsibly saying to students, listen, part of college you go to because you're looking for this type of program, whether it be in math or engineering or business and so on and so forth. But part of it is you're Jewish and you're an observant Jew and you're a caring Jew and you're a Jew with X values. How does this school speak to that? And I think that's a big part of what a person should know going into the college experience. I could tell you by us that's part of that's part of the conversation of going to college.
Okay. Rabbi Haber, and then I'll let Rabbi Tobias also respond, and then we'll cap it at that.
Many years ago, 25, 30 years ago, I used to frequent a bookstore up on Broadway in 112th Street called Labyrinth Books, now called Book Culture. And when I used to go there 20 years ago, the religion section, the Judaica section, the Christianity section was 3 stacks deep. You could walk for maybe 300 feet and find books on both sides of the aisle. I still go to the bookstore today. And you have religion taking up a half of a stack of books. Something has happened in Western culture, specifically in academia, in the last 10, 15, 20 years that has convinced the students that the truth that we get through revelation is no longer a source of truth that's reliable. And that what's happening in culture to these days, in college, is that the convincing students, some of you are sitting in this room, that the religion that has given us 3,000 years of success has no truth anymore. Where does the truth come from? The reason, the rational mindset, the intellect. That is a real risk if we send students, even after 12 years of good education, and we all provide good education, after 12 years going to college and being a member of a student body that sits in an audience of maybe 100 to 200 students with a professor that says that religion is no longer a source, that revelation is no longer a source of truth, is a real risk. And I appreciate the question because it's a question that each family, as Rabbi Bull's mentioning, each family has to prioritize. What is the definition of success? Is success equal $? That's not my definition of success. I don't believe Judaism ever thought that success is a dollar sign. Judaism is based on values.
Judaism, Rabbi.
What?
Judaism?
Judaism.
Money?
What?
You don't see a relationship? I'm kidding.
Judaism is based on values. It's based on a strong family unit. It's based on community. It's based on an identity of believing that Hashem gave us the emet through revelation. That question, every family thinking about which college to send their child to has to deal with that question, and it's very, very significant. So thank you for that question.
Rabbi, you want to end it up? Good? All right, so thank you again, rabbis. I know it's a fast day. We appreciate you allowing us to put you under the spotlight. I think it was enlightening to see how much the different schools represented by the rabbis here agree. And a lot of their common answers were very enlightening, and I hope we can do this again as a community. And thank you.